while we are entering, while we're letting all of our panelists come into the call, I just want to say that on behalf of Commissioner Mattis Castillo and I, we are excited about this platform development. I want to thank our government relations team of Jennifer O'Rourke and Melissa Finnegan for their work. And then, of course, our local teams of Elizabeth Emerson, Pierre Willett, and then federal team, Mike Erlinson, who are all here on this call. So, but what I'm going to start out by having all of us as commissioners introduce ourselves, and we'll go according to district, and I'll start because Commissioner Frethem will be just a couple of minutes late. So Mary Jo McGuire, Commissioner District 2.
Krista Mattis Castillo, Commissioner District 3.
And we don't, and I want to say Commissioner Tony Carter, who is District 4, she's not able to be with us today. She sends her regrets. So we're sorry she can't be here, but she'll get all the notes and we'll be talking, we'll be sharing all of this with her. And she has been attending our weekly, when she's available, she attends our weekly meetings that we continue to have on the legislative issues. So grateful for that. Okay, so we're on 5, District 5.
Rafael Ortega, Commissioner for District 5.
Thank you. And then Commissioner McDonough is District 6, and I know he's going to be joining us. So then I'll let Commissioner Reinhardt.
I'm District 7, last in the alphabet too. No matter
wow.
how you cut it, I'm gonna be last.
Either way, you're
Victoria
good.
Reinhardt, District 7, and that's all of the city of White Bear Lake, Maplewood, North St. Paul, and the Hillcrest neighborhood in St. Paul. And I hope I'm not messing things up here too much, but my screen is like bobbing back and forth to all kinds of different things. So I'm having trouble seeing who's here and who's not. Anyhow, I'm going to do my best.
Okay, well, thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. I don't know what that is about. I'm looking at the screen. So now the commissioners have all introduced themselves. I've actually mentioned all of the names, but maybe now that everyone's on board here, why don't people just wave when I say your name so that people know, well, we're the only ones on the call, right? So everybody knows who everyone is. So we're good. Thanks. But I want to recognize that our county manager, Ryan O'Connor, is also here. And Mi Chang and Lisa D are here as tech support, I understand. Well, Mi is here for her role, but Lisa, you're here for tech support?
Yes.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Thank
the
you
reason
for that.
people are bouncing around is we're spotlighting certain people. And so at the beginning, as we're putting people on as spotlighted, just so you stay stable the rest of the workshop, that's why you're jumping at the very beginning. So a little jumble at the beginning helps keep some stability the rest of the way.
Great. Thank you for that. And we just appreciate everyone being here. And I will say again, because I was mentioning it at the beginning, how much we appreciate our legislative team's work. We meet weekly. I will say that's new this during the pandemic, where we've been meeting in virtual meetings every week throughout the whole year, not just during the legislative session. And that includes Commissioner Mattis Castillo, Jennifer O'Rourke, Melissa Finnegan, Elizabeth Emerson, and Pierre Willett have been meeting weekly. When Tony Carter, Matt Hill join us when they can. And so I just want to say a deep note of gratitude to everyone for all the time that they're putting into this, and especially now to Jennifer and Melissa for their work on this platform development. So with that, I'm going to let Jennifer will start us off. And I'm being informal with this workshop. Usually I like to use our formal names, but I'll be informal here. So Jennifer, you can start, and then you can introduce people as they speak, or they can introduce themselves. So thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. If it's okay, I'll just introduce those who are both guests and other staff that are in the room, so we all know who's here. And then I would point out Commissioner McDonough has raised his hand.
Thanks.
So maybe in the interest of time, I'll introduce the Ramsey County folks quick. We have County Manager Ryan O'Connor with us live at the courthouse. We have Government Relations Specialist, Melissa Fagan, who is the other half of the two of us. And we have John Sickfelland, who I believe is sitting in. John is my boss. And as you know, government relations is part of communications and public relations. So that's appropriate for today. I believe, I don't know if
So-
any deputy county managers
Yeah.
were able to join today.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Jennifer, I don't see Commissioner McDonough on here. he's not on my screen. So you say he's raising his hand, but I'm wondering what screen I should be on here then, but I don't see him. So if Jim, if you're on somewhere, I don't see it. Oh, and then, but I see that Commissioner Fretham has joined us. So I guess I'll have to hope that they enter my screen at some point.
I was in the wrong room.
Okay.
I was watching you guys as a attendee.
Great, now I see you. Yay. Thank you. All right. Okay, we've got you and then Commissioner Fretham has joined us as well. So we've got the team is all here, the board is all here. And as I said before, Tony Carter regrets that she's not able to be here today, but we'll share all this information with her. And she's been sitting in on our meetings. Okay, with that, Jennifer O'Rourke.
Thank you. Back to me. I'm going to just introduce quickly. We have our Goff public team. Elizabeth Emerson, who's the VP of Government Relations, will be presenting to you in a few minutes a state legislative outlook. Joining her are Pierre Willette, who I don't know if you can see him on your screen or not. Pierre is somebody we work with several times a week, but Pierre and Elizabeth are our main contacts with Goff in a day-to-day role. Joining them also is Andrew Hassick, who is also part of the team that we work with at Goff. On the federal level, we have Mike Erlinson from Aurora Strategies joining us today. His partner in DC is Tom Downs, who a number of you have worked with, I think before, at least met in a workshop last spring. Tom is up in the air right now in an airplane and was not able to join for this particular workshop. I know he was a little bit sad about that because he actually enjoyed it the last time around. So we'll get him in here next time. With that, I believe we've introduced everybody. And if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I would like to start with slide 2 and whatever staff is driving this, if they could bring up the PowerPoint.
Thank you. And while they're pulling that up, I just want to say that I appreciate Commissioner Manis-Castillo was going to take this meeting. I wasn't sure about my schedule today, but I was able to do this meeting. And so I appreciate Commissioner Manis-Castillo agreeing to run the meeting if I wasn't able to be here. So.
I personally can't see the slide deck. I don't know if others are able.
We can't
Not
see it.
quite. Okay,
We can't see it either.
Jen, I'll put it up. Thank you.
thanks. Great.
All the preparation and all the practicing we were doing, and then there it is now. It's okay.
Well, thanks everybody for being here today. What we have before you is our usual October and November meeting where we have a workshop with the board. That's a public venue to go through really the process and take some discussion about preparing for the 2022 state and federal sessions. As you all know, those come up quick. And I feel really good about where we're at in terms of what we've gathered from staff and whatnot, and the work that's ahead of us. As you can tell by this agenda, we've just added kind of a new component this year that I'm excited about, and that's having our federal and state contract lobbyists come in to just give a legislative outlook from their vantage point. So there isn't going to be a lot new here necessarily, but I'm hoping that those outlooks and just can really color the discussion at the end, and we have plenty of time to go over that. We'll close out as we usually do with some discussion and then next steps. Slide 3, please. I just wanted to highlight this for you. In this virtual environment, we still published and printed our legislative priorities. You can tell on the left, super tiny print, we've got the federal look. You could go back one, but we did mail these out to legislators to their homes because they were all working virtually too. I know we dropped these off in the legislative or in your offices, but this has been something that we're able to go back to, and it's a handy thing when you do work with members in real live meetings. I would point out we won some awards in August with the Minnesota Government Communicators. We won an award both for the look and the modern kind of feel to this document, but also they were impressed by the fact that we tied our various platform positions to your actual strategic priorities. Slide 4, please. So the purpose of today's workshop, I kind of touched on that already, but it's really just to share where we're at in the development and next steps, take any questions you all might have about particular issues or what we've been up to. I know we enjoy a lot of one-on-one time with you as commissioners, and I hope we always have that going forward because it's really valuable for the work that we do both at the federal and the state levels, and you're all very connected with your own legislative and congressional relationships, and I think that really values or it's a very good thing for the county. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm going through my notes too. Slide 6 or slide 5. Slide 5 is a lot of words on one screen, I know, but it's really just the timeline for how we develop and put together the work. As you know, we had a special session in, back to slide 5, please. We had a special session in June, which always kind of drags everything out. Melissa and I this summer is sort of something different post-COVID, or at this stage in COVID, we've been able to meet with a decent number of our delegation in one-on-one meetings, done some of those at coffee shops. Some of those have been in parks, but it's just been a nice time to connect with them and hear about their priorities, what they might be working on for next year, and kind of educate them or bring them up to speed on what we're working on at the county. As you know, there are a lot of times they're interested in what we're doing at the county, and it's not necessarily legislative work. I would point out we do have a delegation meeting this Thursday at noon. And we'll be doing we'll have our CFO in to do a presentation on the AARP dollars. If I jump off video, it's just so I can keep my internet stable at home. I don't want to read out loud to everybody, but if there's any questions on this bulleted list of where we're at in the process, we're happy to take those questions. Next slide, Melissa. Go ahead.
Thank you. So in the spirit of community partnership, both with Ramsey County residents as well as our own Ramsey County staff, we've been expanding our engagement efforts, both over last year's legislative session and then continuing into next year's legislative session. So this previous session, we had a delegation meeting in early January with our traditional delegation to discuss our platforms. We also, for the first time, hosted 2 town halls in December of 2020 to do sort of a legislative involvement 101. One of those was for community, one of those was for staff. They were well attended and we got a lot of positive feedback on those. I think we're considering doing something similar again this year. We also added a new virtual staff meeting check-in on Monday mornings for a lot of those subject matter experts whose work impacts the legislature or is impacted by the legislature. They found those really helpful just to weekly check in, to keep track as a group what bills are moving, what hearings are happening, so that we were all in sync with each other. And we are going to continue those weekly meetings in the 2022 session. And then as from previous sessions, we did the weekly updates during session for commissioners, subject matter experts, deputy county managers, et cetera. And as you may have noticed in this virtual legislative session, it's giving us a lot of opportunities to have our commissioners engaged at the legislature. And I think we had just about every commissioner testify at least once in the 2021 legislative session. 2022, it's planning some engagement efforts. We're going to have a discussion on our platform with the Citizen Advisory Council coming up in either October or November. We're nailing that down. As Jen mentioned, we're continuing to meet one-on-one with our Ramsey County legislators to discuss their priorities and our priorities for 2022. And we are planning additional town halls, both on the legislative platform as well as legislative involvement. So a lot of engagement effort happening here at Government Relations. And then this is just a reminder slide for you as we start to think about our 2022 platform priorities, what our priorities were in 2021. So there were 5 priorities in 2021, including funding our COVID public health response, the economic recovery, and the DHS waivers, investing in housing stability, addressing racial disparities and out-of-home displacements, funding transportation, and improving mental and behavioral health systems and supports, which was a new priority for 2021. So those are the priorities we had. As always, you can shift, change, do whatever you want with priorities for 2022. We just wanted to give these back to you as a baseline to think about. Go forward. It's not moving. Why is it not moving?
Melissa, I can get
Thank
control.
you. I appear to be stuck. I don't
Okay.
know what happened.
That's okay. I can drive it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jen, I'm going to hand it back to you for the platform wins.
Thanks. We included this slide and we're happy to report it felt like there were more wins for counties overall. And I say counties because we work closely with AMC and Hennepin in all of the counties on a whole host of these. There was a brand new homelessness aid for counties starting in 2023, which for Ramsey will be about $3 million. The 2023 part is significant because I think that's one of the federal AARP dollars will filter out. We were successful in getting those bonding changes, the technical changes done for the Hmong American Partnership Training Center. It took a lot of, I know that was technical and clarifying, but that was a lot of behind the scenes work. We were successful with other local governments in securing $10 million in the bonding bill for the second train to Chicago, and spent a lot of time defending against potential transit cost shifts to Ramsey and Hennepin counties. And for all 4 or 5 of these bullets, I just want to say thank you for the various commissioners on here. A lot of you were active in that space. Melissa?
And then the rest of these are largely health and human services focused. So we were able to enhance Medicaid asthma services for children and their families. That's something Ramsey County has been doing that's now expanding statewide. Working with our partners at the Association of Minnesota Counties, we were able to make sure that counties were held harmless for the DHS overpayment mistake for chemical health services. We don't have to foot the bill for their mistake, which is nice. We were able to continue some of the health and human services COVID-19 waivers that in the process of learning through the pandemic, we discovered these things work actually really, really well. And we wanted them to become permanent. We were able to reprioritize the basic sliding fee wait list so that more families can get assistance for their childcare costs. I will note that reprioritization was a temporary change. So going back, we should consider fighting to make that change permanent. And then at the very end of session, we successfully defended against the elimination of the Market Bucks program. It was eliminated in the ag budget at the end of session and reinstated in the state government budget during special session. So that was a nice win. Next slide, me.
I'll jump back in, Melissa. We put this slide together just to remind you, because so much of each platform is carryover from year to year. Even though the 10 million for the second train to Chicago got done, there were items in our priority list for bonding that didn't see any funding, but frankly, there wasn't, this year wasn't a bonding bill. This year was a budget session. So River's Edges, we did have in our platform at 40 million, the 2 BRT or the The transit corridors are in there. And then we had a support item for Gibbs Farm. We just wanted to include in on here. And as a reminder at the bottom for 2022, these are the 3 items that we submitted into the MMB process that were due on June 15th. This is a good problem to have. The park at River's Edge came down to $26 million in terms of our ask. Rice Street revitalization at $5 million and the Bruce Vento Trail extension at $3.5 million. Next slide. We included this slide only for the state priorities. We didn't include the suggestions on the federal side yet, but in meeting with Chair Carter and Commissioner Mary Jo McGuire in early September, in the one-on-one meetings that we were trying to have with everybody, Commissioner Carter suggested just kind of lumping these together in a different way, as opposed to having just 5 bulleted items. As you can tell, we're kind of by using a different category, if you will, or a bucket of priorities, we're able to include more priorities. So as you can see under family and community stabilization, we can include both housing stability and addressing racial disparities. Just something to consider. I'd be eager to hear your feedback, whether it's here today or in the weeks ahead as we build towards our January platforms. Next slide. Well, now's the fun part where we turn it over to our contract lobbyists, if that's okay, Madam Chair. Elizabeth Emerson is up first, and she has slide 11 here and slide 12.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks, commissioners, for having us here today. I had a sneaking suspicion that my garbage and recycling truck would come at precisely the moment I would start presenting, and that in fact is what's happening. So apologies for maybe a shady connection here. As Jen mentioned, and the timeline suggested, the legislature will head back into session on January 31st next year. And certainly there are a number of things that are going to affect kind of the outlook and exactly what happens during the session. So we thought we would spend just a little bit of time talking through the factors that will be weighing on legislators as they arrive and as they're thinking through what their priorities are going to look like, to hopefully give you a sense of kind of how the Ramsey County priorities may land in the bigger picture of what's happening at the state capitol. First, I don't need to tell any of you that after the 2020 and 2021 legislative session, there was a solid 18 months where legislators were working with each other virtually. And I think the word fatigue is probably a light way of saying what was happening to them. You could see just the relationships, even those that were strong at the outset of the legislative session, were kind of slowly evaporating, as is human nature. So I think as we think about next session, certainly the logistics of how they set up that legislative session will have an impact on how they're going to be able to function. We've heard some thought that depending on how the COVID virus is and the Delta variant is affecting things, they may consider continuing to have virtual operations of the session, maybe a hybrid or potentially in person. I think that has had a tremendous impact. And certainly as we think of the next factor in new caucus leadership, there are many legislators who have served for 2 years together who have never even met each other. And when you think about the dynamics of negotiating a state budget, consideration of the federal funding that's been coming, and pretty difficult policy issues, certainly just that overall physical environment has an effect on how they'll operate. The Senate will have all new leadership for their part. Senator Gazelka, the former majority leader of the Senate Republican caucus, announced that he'll be running for governor. And in their transition, that caucus elected Jeremy Miller from the Winona area to lead that caucus. Miller has a pretty solid reputation. He was one of the original founders of the Purple Caucus. He's known to be a convener and a legislator who wants everyone to get around the table. But certainly he has the drive to keep that caucus in the majority. And so how he handles and balances those competing factors within his caucus will be important to watch. And for the Senate DFL, they also have new leadership. Many folks saw Senator Susan Kent will be stepping down, not just from her leadership or step down from her leadership position, but also will not be seeking re-election. And that caucus elected Senator Melissa Lopez Franzen from the Edina area, and a pretty significant shift in their overall leadership. They elected new assistant leaders as well. So the dynamics in the Senate are still yet to be tested, and that's certainly something we'll be watching, just knowing that there is a smaller margin of majority in the Senate than there is in the House. Redistricting will also be something. It is never a pleasant time of year when you have members of your own party running against each other, and that most certainly is likely to happen when redistricting comes. You're already seeing a few shifts. I see Representative Tu Zhang declared that he'll be running in Senator Susan Kent's district. Will there be other candidates? What does that district look like? There's just a lot of still unanswered questions on an issue likely to be resolved in the courts, knowing that a divided legislature isn't likely to come up with a suitable solution that they all can support for those district lines. The stating the economic outlook, I think it was fairly good news for the state of Minnesota that the last 3 months of tax receipts have been, I think, about $650 million over projections. There was a doubling of the corporate tax receipts that came into Minnesota, lower refunds, and across all tax types, increased receipts for the state of Minnesota. So that will leave legislators likely a pretty hefty budget surplus to consider next year, in addition to just over $1 billion in federal funds that they left unspent on the bottom line for consideration next year. So we anticipate, heading into kind of an uncertain Delta variant time that economic outlook may temper, but it is pretty likely that the state will have some significant resources on the bottom line to consider for one-time spending or ongoing, that they'll need to balance new spending initiatives or tax cuts. Federal funding, I think, in addition to just the sheer dollar amount, there was a lot of federal funding kind of divided up to create political alliances during the last legislative session, some that the legislature got to spend, some that the governor got to spend. I think this session will see some committees want to do a deeper dive on exactly how those dollars were spent, how the governor allocated his portions, what are the results coming from those funds that have been directed by the legislature. And I would also say, and I applaud Ramsey County for kind of its transparency and how it is spending its federal dollars. But I would suspect that perhaps the legislature may want to look at how local governments are also spending their federal dollars. I think that there is some concern that there may be overlapping or competing funds being spent by the various levels of government. So to the extent that the legislature wants to spend some time on that, I think hold on to your hats for that. And while you're holding on, keep holding tight because you're all aware we have some elections in November where all 201 legislators plus our constitutional officers will be up for election. So layer all of the kind of above talking points onto that November politics, and we have a recipe for a whole lot of fun in a pretty short amount of time from January 31st through the middle of May. So a lot to be accomplished. I think, I don't think anyone thinks there'll be a special session barring any, post-May special session. I personally don't think there's going to be a special session to address the frontline worker pay. Perhaps there are many legislators holding out to resolve that issue until next session, where there is a fair amount of money that perhaps they could increase that pot. If we want to advance the next slide. As we think about the items that they may consider, I think there's a couple categories that we think about. Certainly one is unfinished business. That's going to be different in the eye of various beholders at the Capitol. I think the two that initially come to my mind are energy and environmental reforms. There certainly were a lot of items pushed by the House that didn't happen this legislative session that may be items they want to pick back up off the table. Legalized marijuana, I don't necessarily think we'll see another floor vote in the House during an election year, but who knows? I also think worker and workplace issues are going to be at the forefront. We've seen various attempts at paid sick and safe leave, earned sick and safe time, and the like. I also think there is a looming problem that our state's unemployment insurance fund has. We're nearly $1 billion in debt to the federal government. And the legislature put a pause on that tax that employers are levied to contribute to unemployment insurance. That pause ends at the end of this calendar year. So automatically DEED would adjust that tax rate. And so I think there's legislators who are concerned that that's a pretty significant tax adjustment, but they would have to act pretty quickly to address that, to kind of halt that tax rate increase again. But I think that all of those issues are going to combine for the legislature to spend some pretty significant time on workplace issues, certainly unemployment, and trying to dive deeper into our workplace mismatch for our employees and employers right now. Bonding, and Jennifer touched on that a little bit. With a lot of cash on the table and a pretty shady economic long-term outlook, bonding is a great one-time way to infuse both jobs and projects and infrastructure improvements into the economy. So I would anticipate a pretty significant bonding bill, but that will not be without drama, and likely will still be the last thing out the door as a lot of the horse trading happens along the legislative path. And then, of course, in an election year, political based issues, I think the timing for a Supreme Court decision, certainly around issues of abortion, will maybe have an impact in the legislative session. That may be pushed out to spring, summer, and become more of an electoral issue. But I think certainly public safety and issues of choice will be on the table, and certainly things that both Republicans and Democrats will try to enter into the legislative debate. And then, traditionally these off years are supposed to be bonding and agency policy work. So there actually has been a significant amount of work amongst all agencies to put together kind of those policy bills that are incredibly boring, but certainly have a great impact on how state government actually operates. So I think that'll be something that also will be the little engine that could maybe of the legislative session. And those are kind of the issues I had, Jennifer. Certainly would open it up to others if they'd like to add to kind of what we see for this on the state side. And I know Mike will be adding to the federal intrigue.
Thanks, Elizabeth. You did a great job. I think we're running ahead of schedule a little bit, Madam Chair. So if you wanted to take a few specific questions of Elizabeth, given what she just kind of put out over the last 2 slides, I think we have time for some of that.
Great, thank you, Director O'Rourke. I'm going to go back to titles, and thank you, because I do see Commissioner Matas Castillo has a question, so I will entertain questions. So, Commissioner Matas Castillo.
Actually, I don't have a question. I was just clicking on the wrong button. But nice job, Elizabeth. I appreciate your
yes. So I actually do have a question. Can you tell me what's the status of the panel to do redistricting? Did that, I thought that a panel that passed where they're going to draw something up, but then does it still have to go to the legislature for approval and still go to and then if they don't agree, it goes to the courts? Is that how that's going? Can you talk to me about the redistricting panel?
I am 150% not your redistricting expert. I believe the panel actually comes after the legislative process, though, and I may be mistaken. So,
okay, yeah, I'm just not remembering either about this. So maybe we can just get some. We can just have this, talk about it later. It's not really, it's not necessary for this conversation. But I was just curious about that.
One thing I would highlight, Commissioner, if there is interest, the legislative committees are doing kind of a roadshow, if you will, and they're taking public testimony. We certainly can share around the list of those opportunities if you have constituents or yourself would like to testify. And certainly they're having those, I want to say 2 to 3 times a week at various times. So they're fairly accessible both in person and virtually. So we'd be happy to share those.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Are there any are there any questions, or we can continue on, and I know there'll be some general debate about all the other things that we've been covering. So, but if I don't see, I'm just looking on our participant list to see if I see any hands raised. If I don't call on you, you can speak up, but I don't see any other hands. So thank you so much, Ms. Emerson, because that was really great. It was a great overview. Appreciate it. All right, Director O'Rourke, do you want to take?
I'm here.
Yeah.
Thanks. If
And
we
so,
could
yeah.
click to the next slide, please. And next up, we have Mike Erlinson. As you guys know, this federal contract is new to us, starting in last March, as was the GOF. I know Melissa and I have really enjoyed working with both sets of folks here, but I'm ready and happy to turn it over to Mike for a federal outlook.
Thanks, Jennifer. Madam Chair, Commissioners, good afternoon. And certainly is an honor to work for Ramsey County. Time flies. It's hard to believe we're 3/4 through a legislative session. And I would say that both Jennifer and Melissa are super people to work with and do a great job for you guys. So they're making it easy on us. And of course, following Elizabeth and that team, you know, that's a tough act to follow as well. You guys are certainly well represented at the state. I do know on the redistricting stuff that if I was taking bets, and I might even be happy to take a bet from everybody, that this will end up in the Minnesota Supreme Court. So the reason to participate in those panels that Elizabeth called out is that they will look to see what was in the public space as they make some of those determinations. And of course, as we know, the courts are absolutely 100% non-political. So none of the decisions that they make on redistricting between now and when they're supposed to be done on February 15th, at least as it relates to the legislature, will be anything but pragmatic and appropriate decisions, so to speak. So as you all know, if you're even only a tad bit following Washington, D.C., the mystery of Washington and legislative policy making gets more and more interesting every year. And certainly 2021 has been no exception to that particular rule. The biggest change, of course, that we saw in 2021 was the return of congressionally directed spending, or earmarks, as they were called up until about a decade ago when they were removed from the process. They are back. Members of Congress got hundreds of requests for projects in their various communities. Congresswoman McCollum, of course, who represents the county, had more than the rest of the delegation combined, I'm told. And as she said to me in one conversation, every former friend I thought I ever had certainly came forward with a request. The staff did a lot of hard work in narrowing that down, even though she's a senior member of the Appropriations Committee and of course chairs the Defense Appropriations Committee, which is the largest chunk of federal spending that's not a mandatory program like Social Security, Medicare, et cetera. Was limited to the same number of requests as every other member of Congress. The vast majority of members did turn in requests. There were a few that didn't around the country and a couple that didn't in Minnesota, but most participated in the projects, in the process, and submitted projects in their district. And so we were certainly happy that Congresswoman McCollum chose to put some important projects from Ramsey County on her list. And interestingly enough, as we saw the unfortunate tragic event that happened in the county / St. Paul this past weekend, one of those is the request for community violence prevention to the county attorney's office that's included. And that's one that we certainly think would allow the county to take some new leadership in a very important area, and one that no matter how all the congressionally directed spending shakes out in the end, I think that's a project that we can push the administration to support one way or another. And certainly there's a lot of attention and focus, as you all know, on the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area these last very difficult couple of years. We certainly, as new to your team, would love to take credit for all of the federal money coming into Ramsey County. But I suppose if we did that, we'd also have to take credit for COVID, and I'm not sure anybody wants to take credit for that one. But certainly it's a priority to make sure that as those resources come in, we continue to do our part in Washington to alert the members of Congress to challenges that exist either now or in the future, as some of the dispersing of those funds could become more difficult. There's no question people are also looking very closely at that. And so as the county makes decisions, it'll be important to do your due diligence on all the things that you support, because I think there'll be a lot of look backs over the course of the next several years as the money continues to roll out. I think the most recent bill till 2026. So as you know, the appropriations process is kind of on pause. Congress did what it's been doing every year for 10 or 15 years now. They passed something called a continuing resolution for the federal government. That continuing resolution that was passed goes through December 3rd of this year. And at that point in time, my gut would be they will pass another continuing resolution that'll probably take us up to December 24th. And then the members of Congress, whether they gather in little boxes as we are in today or in person, will figure out how to revive the appropriations bills that need to be passed that include the community projects. And so we'll continue to work on making sure the Ramsey County projects are included as priority projects when we get to that final sausage making, or whatever you want to call it, in December of 2021. There was a push at the same time the continuing resolution passed to try to fund the government through December of 2022. As easy as that would have made it on members of Congress, it would not have been good for the ability to make better decisions on federal funding, including these community projects. And so we're glad that actually that didn't happen. At least I'm glad that it didn't happen. The same battles are continuing on the large infrastructure bill. Of course, the large infrastructure bill is the one that includes the Rice Street $6.8 million. That bill, of course, is hanging out there at somewhere around $1 trillion, give or take, depending on which newspaper article you read in any given day, along with the what at one time had been a $3.5 trillion bill that was to invest in a lot of programs, from community college being free to more infrastructure things. Those two bills in the House at least are tied together. My sense is they will get a little bit smaller than the 4.5 total that they are today, but there's no question that the Democrats, a couple of not very vocal Republicans, and the administration sure want to see more money invested in our country. The longer those hang out there, the more dicey they get, and certainly the more challenging it gets for the, I guess you'd call it, the big Biden Build Back America package. The transportation bill virtually has to pass in some form, because that's the one that provides the ability to do all transportation projects in the country, and passes every 5 to 6 years, depending on the window. And if that doesn't pass, we'd be shutting down transportation projects and messing up transit projects and on down the list. So again, a lot of politics going on in Washington. If you look at this stuff on the face of it, it seems like there's no way they'll ever come together and get any of this done. But the same magic that they work every year will likely play itself out over the course of the next few months. And if not, the day before December 25th could be the day that things finally come together. So lots of political fighting on the big stuff, but I think there's a lot of will to get things moved forward. And, it was a positive sign that 69 senators voted for the infrastructure bill, which was probably the largest vote for a single piece of legislation, a single piece of major legislation that we've seen in Congress in 5 or 6 years. So there are a number of senators that want to get that done. It certainly would pass the House if it was brought before the House today, but it's not going to come before the House until there's some sort of a deal on the larger 3.5. I guess it's 2.5 now, dollar package. So as soon as we get through 2021, which is fiscal year 22, and we've talked already to Jennifer and Melissa, it'll be time for you guys on the board to make the decisions about what are the proper community projects / earmark requests that we make of our 3 members of 2 senators and Congresswoman McCollum for the next fiscal year. So it's hard to make those decisions too far in advance because we don't know 100% sure how they're going to play out in the current process in Washington, D.C. that normally, Elizabeth said this too about next year normally would be a bonding bill. I don't think she used the word normal, but something similar. I don't know what normal is in Washington anymore, but we'll get there. And the conversations that I've had with a number of members of Congress, including those that are not even in Minnesota, is that they believe these are here to stay, and that it's just a matter of getting some of them adopted in the first round, and then we'll be moving forward. So, and that's probably more than you needed. Let me pause there. I can't remember if there was another slide on the federal stuff or not. If we want to toss that forward, whoever's driving that.
Mike, I
There it
included
is.
this.
Yeah.
This is Jen. I included this slide just so that we'd have it in front of us, for commissioners to be reminded of what our priorities were going into 2021 from a federal level. They match up pretty closely with our state priorities.
Yeah, and I think as we head into the second session of Congress with the unknowns of the current one, these remain, great priorities that you guys put together last year. And I think pretty much cover most of your areas would be my guess pretty well. So.
Thank you. And if I could just say, these are priorities that I think we share with a lot of counties throughout our state and federal government, right? I mean, I think this is on AMC and NACO's priority list as many of these issues. So, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mike Erlinson. That was a great overview as well. Are there any questions? Yes, Commissioner Reinhardt has a question.
Thank you. Actually, I just wanted to make a comment because I mentioned at the county board meeting this morning that one of the things I did was participate in a video regarding the Mississippi River Restoration and Resilience Initiative. And so one of the things that we thought about was maybe we could, because we did it down on the riverfront, and so it had, the big, the bridge and all this stuff behind me as I was doing this interview. And we thought what we should do is we should just superimpose the river's edge on that, on the video, and then they could say, and this is what it'll look like if you fund that. Anyhow, the people that were doing it didn't take advantage of that opportunity. But the purpose of this video, by the way, was to basically take it to members of Congress. And so I'm one of the spokespersons, but there are others as well. But I do think, clearly Congresswoman McCollum is very supportive of River's Edge. And I know that we're all very much aware of the fact that we were able to get the NACO at the annual conference, we were able to get the resolution for the Mississippi River Restoration and Resilience Initiative. Those 3 R's in a row really kind of mess you up, by the way. Anyhow, that we were able to get NACO support for that. That has really helped a great deal as far as something that's not just from Minnesota. And so I'm not sure how we can continue to make sure that she gets the support, especially from Ramsey County on that. It's not necessarily a platform priority for Ramsey County, although it is very important for the River's Edge project, for much of the infrastructure, some things that are happening because of the importance of the Mississippi River. So I just wanted to, first of all, point out what we weren't able to get, was a imposed picture of the river's edge, but it's, pretty easy to tie them together. If she's supporting us, we're supporting her.
All right, absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt, for bringing that up. And so, because this is just our highlight points, and it does say infrastructure, I'm wanting it definitely to be on your radar, Mike. So I hope, that we somehow reflect that work in our federal platform priorities brochure. What do you think of that, Jen? Or Director O'Rourke? What do you
Thanks,
think?
Madam Chair. Obviously, we've had River's Edge spelled out a very short paragraph about that, and we will be updating that with staff. That's part of both our federal and our state platform. We do that final bullet at the bottom. You all can read like I can. We obviously have included transportation and infrastructure together, and that was before we ever knew that earmarks would be back in 2021. So we can talk more about how to include that differently if folks want to do that. I see Commissioner Ortega has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could just follow up on what I was trying to say, though, is that there's an advantage to us not making the MRRI project or initiative part of our federal platform, but somehow tying them together so that we can get leverage. That's all I'm saying.
I appreciate that. And that's what I'm sort of just thinking out loud and brainstorming. Yeah, how do we reflect that in our platform? Maybe just doing some wordsmithing where we talk about them together in some, a sentence or two on our River's Edge description. So maybe we talk about that, Commissioner Reinhardt, with you, Director O'Rourke. So let's think about that. Thanks. Commissioner Ortega, then Commissioner Mattis Castillo, and then Mr. Erlinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, let me just say, of course, I support our agenda. We've been working on it for a while now, so we just keep refining it. And next year is a bonding year, but it just struck me, and maybe because I've been making a visit to homeless shelters and other things, that and this is probably more to us, the board, I guess, and that is the childcare issue. The more I visit these the homeless shelter, we put a lot of emphasis on helping people get jobs and get housing and so forth. But then two things in my little last couple of weeks, I've been touring around to different places and talking with folks. So childcare gets to be critical now because you get them a job, we get them housing, and now who takes care of their kids? And that becomes an issue, and a lot of times it's the reason why they lose their jobs. Somehow we gotta, we're kind of working against ourselves in many ways because we work so hard here to lose it over there. The other is, and then the different kind of supports. Some folks really need a pair of steel-toe shoes. I'm making this up, but that was the other thing I heard, that folks needed to, they might need equipment to do the job. And that's incumbent on them. And I know I scoured the county and we don't have anything like that. And I've talked to Ryan about it. I just want to throw that out as future, to put it on our agenda. I didn't quite know where it fit in this discussion, but I think this rises to the top because we're talking about all these other things and they sort of go hand in hand.
I really appreciate you bringing that up, Commissioner Ortega, because I'm looking at our, suggested priorities, and this is like for the state and federal, I feel like we have very similar ones. And, within the family and community stabilization, we had these different categories so we could add more of our priorities, and I could see childcare being part of that. Of course, it's also our economic competitiveness and inclusion.
Exactly.
But
That's what
I actually think we should put something about early childhood or childcare in in one of those categories. So I'm gonna suggest that we do something there. And if I could ask me to, can we take the presentation off right now so I can see the whole screen? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. I don't know if everybody else could, but on my iPad, I couldn't see everybody else. So great. Thanks, Commissioner Ortega, for that. So now I'm going to recognize Commissioner Mattis Castillo and then Commissioner Fretham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike, thanks for your presentation. I'm wondering, as we're looking ahead and needing to put our request for member supported appropriations forward for the following year, what you think might be appropriate given the lay of the land, or if something might change in the process, because it was kind of new again this past year. Things were kind of in a scramble, and I'm just wondering how you might propose that we kind of set ourselves up to be ready and prepared for what might come this next coming year.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, thank you for the question. It's a good question. I sort of alluded to it earlier, right? Because we don't know 100% for sure how things are going to shake out in the current FY22 requests. It's hard to get too far ahead of ourselves, potentially changing our requests for FY23. Certainly, none of those requests were called out in the federal priorities document in the past because they didn't exist. And, whether or not they should be called out in your official document or not going forward is, I think I would defer to you all on that. But, maybe not, because you never know which ones are going to make the member of Congress or the senators lists, so to speak. We have been doing a lot of work, and I've been participating on the calls with the state team as it relates to the River's Edge project too, for example. Certainly a federal priority, a state priority. To Commissioner Reinhardt's comments, there's no question the support that the folks have given to Congresswoman McCollum's priority of the Mississippi River, from Itasca through Ramsey County all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, as one that was well received. She's really tried to build a unique coalition of Democrats and Republicans to support the river. I think that does create an opportunity. But as we've talked at the staff level, our request there from the county's perspective really has to focus on the river, right? The development piece needs to be done by the developers, and you have a good chunk of that in place, which is exciting, right? I know we had a conversation, and then maybe this isn't the appropriate place for it, but one of the pictures, kind of highlighted restaurant, right? Let's not highlight restaurant. Let's highlight the natural resource. Let's highlight that bridge down to the river that's open for every member of the community, no matter what your economic status is or whatever it might be, that connection to the Mississippi. That's the kind of thing that's going to inspire, I think, all of your constituents, but also the senators and Congresswoman McCollum. So, as you guys, as individual members, look at your districts for potential projects, whether that be the Vento Trail as an example of one in the past, or the Ramsey County Attorney's Office with the violence prevention, or the Rice Street, finding projects that are unique and special are good. Finding projects that are, and this was really important for FY22. Our current requests is, if the money comes, they need to be able to be put to work and spent on those projects in that fiscal year, right? So, and this was a challenge, not so much for Ramsey County, but some of the other folks we work with. They just didn't have projects that, with a straight face, you could say if it got $1 million, they could spend the $1 million, right? So, as the staff works with you guys to identify those things, we really need to be cognizant that we don't get an earmark for something and then be happy about it and then not be able to spend the money and give it back, because that would make us look bad. That would make the member of Congress look bad, and stuff like that. And we also tried to respect the numbers that Congresswoman McCollum was putting out there as it relates to, trying to keep these requests in and around the $1 million level, because there was so many unknowns out there, and I've just had a conversation with not your Congresswoman, but another one yesterday about whether or not they've been getting pressured from the committee staff to make decisions of their requests. In other words, you know, which project would you like to take off the list because you got one too many, or you're going to get $10 million. How do you want to spend it? That's not happening yet. How that plays out is going to really determine my ability to give a better answer to your question, Commissioner, instead of this long-winded one, which was part of what I had raised my hand for when Commissioner Reinhardt asked her a question. So I apologize for that. But you know, I don't think the members of Congress know yet how these quote unquote earmarks are going to shake out. My sense is they will come back. They will be included in a final package somewhere towards the end of the year. And then we'll be doing what we did with Jennifer and Melissa, you know, the very day you guys hired us this spring, is try to figure out which ones could qualify from the lists that you guys put forward for as good projects to submit to the delegation, and ones that you know, meet the federal priorities. So the other thing that I would say, which is not directly to earmarks, and Madam Chair, at any point in time, just go like this and I will shut up, is to think about things again in the county or in your district that the federal government might be able to help with that aren't necessarily an earmark. Because you do have right now, I would argue, one of the 20 or 30 most powerful members of the U.S. House of Representatives, period. And so if there is something that we can try to get her to pick up the phone and call the administration on, because right now she's even more powerful because the person that inhabits the 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is of the same political party as the Congresswoman. So they will want to be supportive. And she also controls a very important chunk of the budget that is always a concern to presidents, no matter the political party, which is the defense of our nation. And to the Congresswoman's credit, that defense budget number has come down in these difficult times, and those dollars have been allocated to things like global climate change, right? So, but we should really do our part to make sure. And you know, I'm not sure if Commissioner Ortega's comment about childcare is something that we could think of ways to be creative on, but it's worth asking, right? And I know all of you talk to the Congresswoman relatively regularly, so you know, keep thanking her for putting stuff on the list. Keep volunteering to her problems that she can solve for us, but then keep Jennifer in the loop so that, you know, we can do our part to help support those things as well. Thank you. Sorry about that long-winded answer.
No, thank you so much. Commissioner Menace-Castillo, did you have anything else? Or thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Erlandson. That sounds great. And we should be thinking about all those opportunities that we have to engage Representative McCollum, because she's wanting to help us. I mean, she wants to do what we want to have done. So we do want to engage her in things that we can. So thank you for that reminder that we would be looking for those kinds of things. So Commissioner Fretham, and then of course, we're opening it up now to anything on this, anything that we've talked about as far as this platform, this platform development. Okay, Commissioner Fretham.
Thank you. I raised my hand around the conversation related to childcare, and I think in terms of that federal level and talking about our platform priorities, we could be just a bit more expansive in how we talk about things in a way that would incorporate details like childcare. For example, making sure that last bullet around Ramsey County transportation and infrastructure needs, that we are using the more expansive view of infrastructure what does that, and I think by putting transportation in infrastructure, it suggests more the traditional infrastructure, roads and bridges, rather than, as Biden points out, there is infrastructure that supports our economy beyond roads and bridges, like childcare. And I know I've spoken with our government relations team about this, but technology needs and infrastructure is also a huge one, and one that was really a gap that's really been laid bare by COVID, the failure of many of our systems that deliver essential services to people and families to be modern and usable for the average person. And I think rephrasing or tweaking that language to be more expansive would be beneficial. And then as well, improving mental and behavioral health systems and supports. I think that's another one we could just expand a bit more. What is the infrastructure behind accessing mental and behavioral health, and what are the policies that help people do that, whether it's expanding more healthcare coverage, expanding access, prices, programs that help people get into those jobs, because we have such a need for mental health supports right now. So just thinking more broadly, and what is the language that we could use to be a bit more expansive in those priorities, while still fitting, I think, within that box. And I think it'll be easier for us to tie those specific proposals to our priorities if we tweak the language just a little bit there.
Thank you, Commissioner Fretham. I think those are all good suggestions. And Commissioner Reinhardt wants to comment as well on this, I think.
Yes, I absolutely love the idea of putting our priorities into similar language, I guess, as the administration, because Commissioner Fretham is absolutely right. The infrastructure is so much more than roads and bridges, and we get stuck in that all the time. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't include roads and bridges, but I think that there's, I don't even know what the right word would be, but you've got transportation infrastructure, but you also have social infrastructure, or whatever the right words are. And so I think by putting it into kind of the same platform, that it's going to be relative, it will be easier for those in Congress to be able to pull out things and say, okay, this goes to our agenda item. So I really love that idea, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you. And I would just say, yeah, the title would be infrastructure. And we'd have transportation, childcare, and of course, as Commissioner Fretham already mentioned, to technology, broadband, that kind of infrastructure, to the sort of access to technology question as well. Because I know we still have people in Ramsey County that need access. So I think that's a great suggestion on how to frame these issues in line with the federal government. So I'm agreeing with both of you. So we can look at the language on that. So while you're maybe thinking of some other questions, I want to ask you all, what do you think of, our state priorities, the way that we've organized that? And we could do the same kind of thing with our federal priorities, aligning it with how the feds think about things, like we've just had this infrastructure discussion. But if you go back to the suggested state priorities, where we have family and community stabilization, systems transformation, economic competitiveness, and bonding requests as our state priorities. And then under each of those, we have two bullets. Now I'm thinking that our early childhood or childcare needs to be under one of those bullets, under family and community stabilization. I already want to add more. We were trying to really be concise here, but there are so many priorities that we do have. So I don't know if you're all can go back to that, or if we could pull that slide up. I'd really like your I'd like your feedback on how if we think we could organize our platform this way, or add a page. We'll add a page this way. We'll continue to organize it in issue areas. But then, Jen, are we thinking that one of the pages would be, and we've been brainstorming about this, one of the pages would be, with this, the priorities page would be organized in that way. under these 4 sort of bullet points. And I don't know, me, can you pull that slide? What slide is it? I don't know what number it is.
It's slide 10.
10.
It's slide 10 to page 12 of your packet,
Okay,
if you're following that way.
there.
Yeah, Commissioner, we
just-
certainly can. I would just point out that, you know, both of these are about 12 pages of, they're kind of the guts behind the bullets, if you will. You know, so when this is really important to have because it's sort of like your elevator speech when you get on the elevator with Representative Tu Zhang, and he's like, what's the county working on this year? This is sort of what we've got memorized and like how we talk about things, but there's so much more detail that goes into this. And obviously, if you know you're out there at NACO or we're meeting with a legislator, we come up with talking points and we really kind of focus on a lot more detail than what just shows up here. This isn't the only page that people look at, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. So, yeah, and I understand that. So we have these running issues since, of course, I want to keep adding things like childcare and early childhood. And I'm still going to push a little bit on that, only because it's a huge effort in many of our areas. But I don't know if anyone else sees things that we need to, that really should go on this list, even though I know we're talking about a lot of other things in great detail. But I'd welcome any feedback from the rest of you. Okay, so we have Commissioner Mattis Castillo. Oh, well, maybe I'll let County Manager O'Connor make a comment, and then is that okay, Commissioner Mattis Castillo? We'll let County Manager O'Connor talk and give his feedback, and then I'll call on you. Okay, so County Manager O'Connor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I don't have a perfect suggestion or answer, and in some ways, I feel like every platform development process brings in some of the same tension between comprehensiveness versus being tight. You've been there more years than I was when I worked around the Capitol, but at the same time, people give you 13 seconds. And I think the reason our platform won an award and didn't win awards in the past is because it has gotten tighter. So I would encourage us to think about continuing to be laser focused. I think the values that we project are more important than the specificity. And we don't have to solve all this today. Part of it's we can listen, and then how we interpret is important. But I would only challenge the part that I don't think any legislator I talk to would ever question whether Ramsey County cares about early childhood at this point, because your values are pretty clear. And so I think we can try and think about some of that as we move. The one thing I want to highlight, the more you go, that first bullet under family and community stabilization about housing stability. You know, if we don't get funding in the area of affordability and housing and homelessness, you will see hundreds of people without places to sleep beginning next summer. And I don't know of another, I would ask you to think about how much you want to not make that front and center clear. I mean, we're talking about 200 human beings a night in the East Metro. I can't speak for the West Metro, but that's the kind of money and priority. And so there's a part of me that feels like beyond values and a few things, you stay tight. But I wanted to share that as kind of like how we're trying to balance the need to be comprehensive with values-based pieces. And I totally understand that give and tug, and we will work to meet those needs in all settings regardless.
Thank you. And so if I could ask County Manager, so do you feel that the housing is, I mean, I think you've looked at this already. So do you think housing is as prominent as it needs to be? You don't think it needs to be its own bullet point? I mean, it's a sub point.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're okay.
What I would say is when people push me on like, well, what are your priorities? What are your priorities? And you're in those conversations more than I am, but they come up at different spots. I lead them to that first bullet, and it's helpful not to have too many things, because our old platform used to be like, hold on, I just got to get to page 63. Sub-bullet B. And I don't mean to diminish the idea that 63 sub-bullet B doesn't matter, but I think sometimes it almost makes everyone feel like we don't value it enough. And there's this part of loving everything to death that is, to me, it feels like a clear and present risk, but I may be an outlier on that as well.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So we have Commissioner Mattis Castillo and then Commissioner Reinhardt. Commissioner Mattis Castillo.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I was, as I'm looking at, how we have our state listed and our federal, there's obviously alignment in both, right? And where we complement. And So in economic competitive, we have, climate change as a bullet, and climate mitigation, and there's a big federal package as well. And I think that it's important that we're looking at both of those areas of climate impact. As Mike, mentioned, Congresswoman McCollum is a key leader and powerful, and this is an area that's very important to her, as Commissioner Reinhardt knows very well. And so I think that there's a place and something that we really need to think about if we're talking about sustainability, resiliency and sustainability at Ramsey County, whether it's around housing or infrastructure, that we need to make sure that that's also on our federal platform.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Commissioner Reinhardt.
Well, as we are looking at these things, and of course, my mind is going, oh, we should put this in, we should put that in. And there are a lot of
I'm
things.
with you. Yeah.
But the thing is, I remember that I go through that every year. And at AMC, when we choose our priorities, and we get into these, discussions, and it's not that all things aren't important, it's about the priorities. And so there have been many, many times, and I did it recently as well, is to say to the AMC folks, as we're doing that platform, is the priorities doesn't mean that the other things aren't worked on. They are. And there's a difference, because people think if it's not a priority, then it doesn't get any, sunshine on it. And the reality is, when we get into the session, when Mike or Tom talk to us, or Melissa or Jen, when they talk to us about something that's come up, it might not be explicitly stated in our priorities, or in our platform, but we know that it's something that, hey, we've got an opportunity here, we're going to work on it. So I think we have to, there's a way to include things. And I think actually under family and community stabilization and the housing and the things that are here, we could probably, in the background, we can talk about the many different aspects, but in the priorities, I think we need to keep it succinct, because otherwise, and like I said, I've done it myself so many times that I'm preaching to myself here as well, but it's a hard reminder when we want to do everything, and we can't. We can try to do everything, but we have to prioritize something. So there are ways to make sure our voices are heard. But we need to look at what's a priority that we know that we can act on, and what needs to be part of our platform, but not necessarily at that same level. And I think that's kind of what Ryan was saying as well, unless I misspoke.
No, I appreciate that, Commissioner Reinhardt, and I need to hear it all the time, because as you know, it's hard for me and I have to do it at AMC, I have to do it at NACO. I mean, we have to do all this prioritization. It's really hard for me, because of course I want it all to be stated in front of me. So I'm coming around to it, as you can tell. I mean, I sit on this committee, so I have this conversation on a regular basis. So I'm very appreciative of the feedback we're getting from all of you on this, because of course it's our platform, it's the county platform that we're putting out there, and this will be given to our legislators. So at this point, I don't see any other questions, but Jen, do you want to give us the time frame, or do we want to get any more feedback, or tell us where we're going to go with this? So now, if we don't comment now, I mean, we can think about this, and maybe we can still get back to you if we have some thoughts on it. It would be nice if people had any questions or thoughts on this to just do them right now. We are going to end the meeting in 10 minutes. We will end it at 3. But if anyone has anything else they'd like to say about the platform, or any way that we're presenting it to our legislators or to our congressional delegation, that would be good to speak now. And then we'll ask Jen, Director of Org, to give us the platform development and rollout, and where we go from here. Commissioner Reinhardt has a question.
Let's see here.
Or did you? Did you just say?
No.
Oh.
No, I did put my hand up again, because
Yeah.
Earlier we were talking about how the framework, kind of how we put it together. and, you know, for the federal one being more in line with the federal priorities. That doesn't change our priorities. It's just how they are presented. And I want to make that really clear. I wasn't talking about changing them, but putting it in a way that, and whether it's at the state level or the federal level, and I would take direction, obviously, from our lobbyists as to what's the best way to put our priority in a light that at the state or federal level will get the most attention. But the priorities, I'm not arguing, I'm not saying we should change the priorities, other than, you know, in the background, adding some more specificity is, I think, going to be helpful. But that's different. I mean, the pages that we put together that are kind of the summary of the things, those are fantastic. And for some folks, they need that. But you start out with the priorities and then you can get to the more detail if you need it. So I love the way it's been put together.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Reinhardt, and we should, as we've heard from our very capable federal and state lobbyists, you know, that all of you have great experience at this, and if there's any suggestions that you have of how we can present this in the best way, we would definitely welcome that. And I know that Jen's going to talk about this, but we do, this is not our final approval, of course. This is just our workshop. This is a workshop where we get to talk about what we think and brainstorm. And then we will have a legislative committee of the whole where we will be presenting this for our approval. So, you know, we can maybe be talking to we won't have time now to go through it all, but I mean, if you, Mike, or Elizabeth or Pierre want to make any comments now as we wrap this up, as how we think about this or the way we present it, that would be great. And then we'll end with Jennifer giving us the rollout development and platform, the rollout schedule, excuse me. Okay, so Mike, I see your hand up.
Madam Chair, first of all, this is a great conversation and very helpful from our perspective to hear all of you commissioners talk about priorities and whatnot. And you know, sort of, I agree with, as we tell the stories, the important part is to tell the story to whoever you're talking to it in a way that you know resonates with them, right? And our platform document, whether it reflects that exactly, I think is less important. And as for example, as we talked earlier, as we talk about River's Edge, we should talk about it as the river, because we know that's why, if we're talking to Congresswoman McCollum, that's the way she wants to hear it. Right? That may not be the same for a different member of Congress on a different project, right? And on the federal side, I think too, as we support things that we know come to the county because it's a formula-based thing, you know, our support comes for supporting the program, right? That ultimately allocates us based on our population and all those things that, you know, are directly determined, versus having a federal priority that is a specific priority to Ramsey County because it's an earmark, or it's a specific grant request that we're chasing down, and much more specific in that way. And, you know, what we also don't know is if the word infrastructure will forever be the word used as an umbrella for the investments, and not just a bridge, but for the investments in people, or if the worst case scenario, if this, you know, at one point, $3.5 trillion package goes down in flames, maybe nobody will ever use infrastructure again as a way to talk about something like childcare or an investment in families, right? So, but again, the important piece there is, as we're lobbying officials in the Biden administration, that as long as that's the way they're talking about it, we should talk about it the way they're talking about it. And then if it changes, you know, we'll be nimble and we'll change. But again, I think, as was also called out, that's not going to change the priorities of the county, and that's not going to change the core stuff you're working on to make the lives better for the people that live in Ramsey County.
Well said. Well said. Well said, Mike. Did Elizabeth, did you have anything you wanted to add as we make our final remarks, or maybe you've said everything that needs to be said?
Sure.
I don't.
Excuse me. Thank you. I do think specificity on the priorities in particular is incredibly important, and seeing the platform really as a guide for your delegation and, frankly, us as your lobbying team, knowing that counties get pulled into a whole host of issues and are reacting all of the time. And so having that narrative available that you can fit issues as they come forward and be able to be nimble and not have to think at a moment's notice and react to those issues. Having the ability to have them fully thought out ahead of time is incredibly important. It is, I appreciate the temptation to have many priorities, but I think making them very, very specific, I think that's a challenge as well. Because I think, again, as you're reacting to, do you support $100 million in childcare? Well, okay, who doesn't? But what elements of childcare really are a priority, and how does Ramsey County lend their voice to that, I think is important too. So thinking through those specifics as you develop the priorities.
I really appreciate those comments, and just thank you both. And Pierre, I know you're on the call. Thanks everyone that is working on our behalf. We really do appreciate it. And so thanks everyone on the call. Jen, I'm going to let you quick wrap up with your last slide on the rollout, if you want to do that, or
Sure. Yes.
yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's slide 15. Just real quick, the next time you'll see this officially would be at the Legislative Committee of the Whole on Tuesday, November 16th, obviously after a board meeting. That gives Melissa and I a few weeks to do a lot of work. I would encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions at all. We'll be reaching out to some of you for, issues that you're particularly close to or have been over the years, to make sure that the wording is what it is. We do our darndest to get all that wordsmithing done for the November 16th. And then final approval would happen hopefully on December 14th.
Great. And then we're looking to having a official Ramsey County delegation meeting again in January to talk to our delegation about it, our legislative delegation. And then, as we've heard, January 31st, the session will start. So just thanks again, Director O'Rourke and Specialist Finnegan. You have been just amazing. Commissioner Matas Castillo, just such a dedicated member of the team, and I know that Commissioner Carter as well. It's been a lot of work going over all these things and brainstorming them all. So thanks to everyone for all the work. Of course, the board, thanks for all of your work on doing this platform, and County Manager O'Connor, and the whole government relations team. So with that, we will just be in touch, and thanks for a great discussion. And we'll have a great day, everyone. Rest